Welcome to this explainer. We've got an absolutely massive topic today. We're going to try and compress 1,600 years of chaotic, sweeping history into one structured journey. We're talking going all the way from muddy battlefields to a global superpower, and finally landing on the modern nation we see today. Let's look at how one incredibly resilient island continuously transformed itself just to survive.
Okay, let's dive into this because honestly, this is the core question we have to answer. How on earth did a small, weak territory that was constantly being battered by outside invaders completely flip the script? How did it become the largest empire the world has ever seen? It's a huge paradox, right? And to understand it, we really need to trace the threads of strategy and sheer adaptability that run through centuries of their history. To make sense of this massive timeline, we've broken it down into 5 clear chapters: forging the UK, the engine of empire, peak power and wounds, wars and collapse, and finally, the modern reinvention. Let's get right to it.
Chapter 1. Forging the United Kingdom. From an invaded territory to a unified island. So for centuries, the island's identity was basically decided by whoever showed up to invade it next. It was a restless place. The Romans laid down roads, walls, and bathhouses. Then you had the Angles and Saxons, who actually gave England its name. The Vikings brought raids and fire, and in 1066, the Normans brought a French crown and totally reshaped the English language. Now, these early invasions left deep scars, sure, but they ultimately built the unexpected, stubborn foundation of the nation. Add in internal fractures later on, like Henry VIII literally splitting from Rome just to secure a divorce, and you get an island with a fiercely independent, though politically isolated, identity.
And this brilliantly illustrates how early weaknesses turned into major strengths. In 1588, Catholic Spain sent the legendary Spanish Armada to completely crush this isolated island. But against all odds, England won. And that victory, it gave the island a brand new swagger. Fast forward to 1603. Queen Elizabeth I passes the crown to James of Scotland, which planted this radical new idea of a single united island. And then in 1707, the Act of Union officially formed Great Britain. Just like that, a fractured island became a single united state. But uniting the island wasn't exactly smooth sailing. There were some serious internal growing pains. You see, kings believed they ruled by divine right. Parliament strongly disagreed. This tension exploded into the English Civil War, where Charles I was literally executed. The nation briefly even became a republic under Oliver Cromwell, before eventually restoring the monarchy. But when a later king, James II, pushed his luck, Parliament didn't start a war. They just invited William and Mary of Orange to take over the throne. No bloodbath, just a glorious revolution. The monarchy learned a vital and very literal lesson: adapt to Parliament's power or lose your head.
Chapter 2. The Engine of Empire. Expanding borders and industrial might. Once stable at home, ambition turned outward. With the home front secure, the Royal Navy effectively became a slingshot, launching British ambition across the oceans, particularly with the East India Company. Look at the shift here. What started out as just a private trading company quickly morphed into a ruling power. Clerks suddenly became governors, and simple trading treaties turned into aggressive tax collections. But the source material highlights a very dark reality here. Profits always came first. When famine hit Bengal in 1770, millions suffered devastating losses while revenue just kept flowing right back to Britain. Across the Atlantic, the drive to adapt was just relentless. They planted the Jamestown colony in 1607, and, they found tobacco instead of gold, but they made it work. When the 13 American colonies grew restless over taxes and famously broke away in the 1770s, did Britain stop? No way. They pivoted almost instantly, setting up a penal colony at Sydney Cove in Australia in 1788, literally turning prison ships into the foundation of a brand new society. And by 1801, they formally fused with Dublin to create the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. They were constantly expanding, constantly adapting. Of course, when you expand that much, you're going to create rivals. And the greatest of them was Napoleon. In 1805, Napoleon tried to completely strangle Britain at sea. But Admiral Horatio Nelson met the combined French and Spanish fleets off Cape Trafalgar. The sheer defiance of Nelson is absolutely legendary. He was effectively saying, "These are my waters. You can't outmaneuver me." Nelson actually died on deck during the battle, but his tactical genius crushed the enemy fleet. With the English Channel finally safe, the Navy became an unstoppable world-spanning highway. And traveling right down that highway was the unmatched, sheer power of the Industrial Revolution.
Steam engines, iron, and coal were feeding massive new factories. Railways were stitching inland towns directly to global ports. And telegraph wires, they allowed for instant global messaging. I mean, imagine the shock of the internet being invented today. That's what this felt like. Raw materials poured in from around the globe and manufactured goods poured out. Industry was no longer just about work. It was a force of nature that literally made London the undisputed banker of empires.
Chapter 3: Peak Power and Deep Wounds, the heavy price of unchecked expansion. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer unprecedented scale of it all. By the late 1800s, the British Empire controlled 25%, a full quarter, of the world's landmass, and hundreds of millions of people. It's a scale of dominance that is almost difficult for us to even comprehend today. But as we'll see, maintaining that massive slice of the pie cast a very long and often very dark shadow. The moral and human costs of this peak era were absolutely staggering, both at home and abroad. Inside Britain, those booming industrial cities masked horrific domestic slums and rampant child labor. Just across the Irish Sea, the 1845 potato blight ruined harvests, creating a devastating famine that hollowed out villages and forced mass migration, leaving a wound in the Union that never fully closed. And abroad, during the Boer War in South Africa, when commandos ambushed British forces, the military responded by grinding the resistance down using grim civilian concentration camps. We're seeing a clear historical record of the severe toll of this unchecked ambition. All this friction eventually reached a boiling point in Asia. By 1857, East India Company rule had bred massive resentment. A single spark, rifle cartridges rumored to be greased with animal fat, set off a major uprising across North India. While the revolt was ultimately defeated, it entirely changed the game. The British Crown realized they couldn't leave this to a private corporation anymore. It forced London to pull the plug on the East India Company entirely. India passed directly to the Crown, and Queen Victoria took on a brand new title, Empress of India. Chapter 4: Wars and Imperial Collapse. The world's first industrial wars. So, as rivals like Germany and the United States rapidly caught up, the 20th century became the ultimate test of survival. The same machines Britain had perfected for trade were now being used for slaughter. In 1914, World War I turned Europe into a horrific graveyard of trenches, mud, and gas, wiping out an entire generation of young men. Just 2 decades later, in 1939, Britain was fighting for its life again, surviving the terror of the Blitz, relying on radar, Alan Turing's brilliant code-breaking, and sheer stubborn grit. They held on against Nazi Germany until the Allies pushed back through D-Day. By 1945, Britain stood victorious. But the wars had shattered its spirit and completely drained its fortune. The empire was broke. So what do you do with an empire when you can't afford it, and the people don't want to be in it anymore? Well, you adapt. Step 1. Following years of massive protests and Gandhi's marches, India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947. Step 2. The dominoes began to fall. Colonies across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Middle East claimed their independence. And largely, Britain didn't fight it this time. They chose to sign treaties and lower flags instead. Step 3. Something really unexpected emerged from the unraveling. Dozens of those former colonies formed the Commonwealth, choosing to stay linked not by force, but by a shared history and trade. Let's move to Chapter 5 and see how this builds into the modern reinvention, finding identity without an empire. And wow, did they reinvent themselves. At home, right out of the rubble of bombed-out cities, they built the National Health Service, offering free medical care to everyone. Immigration from the former colonies completely reshaped the culture, transforming places like London into a vibrant global crossroads of finance, diverse street food, and incredible art. On the world stage, Britain became a founding, leading voice in NATO, the UN, and the G7. And finally, in 1997, they officially handed Hong Kong back to China, marking the formal end of the empire. But as is always the case with history, it's never perfectly clean. Even with this shiny new globalized identity, old internal fractures remained right at home. The Union itself was still being tested. Scotland continued to push for more autonomy, and Wales gained its own parliament. And critically, in Northern Ireland, decades of violent conflict, known as the Troubles, were finally addressed with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which managed to hold together a very fragile but absolutely essential peace. And then, the 21st century delivered a whole new set of shocks. The timeline from the source material shows us exactly how this played out. The 2008 global financial crash severely slammed the economy, leading to years of deep spending cuts and austerity. Frustration simmered, and it eventually turned outward, culminating in the historic 2016 vote to leave the European Union. England largely voted to leave, while Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to stay, fracturing the political map yet again before Brexit was officially finalized in 2020.
So what is the grand takeaway from all of this? If we distill the source material down to one word, it is adaptation. Centuries of incredible global reach left this island with massive cultural weight in music, media, and science, but also heavy old ghosts that spark intense debate to this day. Through Roman invasions, civil wars, massive imperial expansion, and crushing world wars, the UK today is smaller, louder, wildly more diverse, and still constantly reinventing itself.
Which brings us to a final, really profound thought to chew on. After 1,600 years of chaotic survival and constant change, what does it truly mean to be Great Britain today when the empire is long gone and the world no longer waits for your lead? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it helped map out this incredible history for you. See you in the next one.